Over the last couple months, I've been on a mission to create fun enemies for my game.
Not hack and slash, enemies that require thinking and timing, which in turn hopefully creates fun Souls-like combat. Previously, we created the main character, which is a rabbit, created the player controller that works similar to a Souls-like game, created the first section of the open world, which is where the protagonist lives, and created aerial movement to get around the map faster.
First on the list, let's create a new enemy.
We do already have a fox boss, but he didn't turn out how I hoped. He ideally just needs reworking, so let's start with a blank page.
So I decided on creating a ferret, because they are one of the biggest predators to the protagonist of the story.
First, I started by modeling the ferret. It took a while to get the proportions right, since I wanted him to have similar traits to real life, like having a long body and having dark paws. Of course, I also had to give him that iconic eye mask too.
My idea is to have the ferrets be soldiers and knights.
Similar to the soldiers in Elden Ring, I created a few different pieces of armor so I can mix and match depending on the enemy type. I want there to be 3 different types: the sword and shield soldier, the two-handed soldier, and the archer, so it adds ranged attacks for the player to think about. I started with the shielded soldier. Once the weapons were modeled, I then went on to animating, and this is where I spent a bit of time figuring out what went wrong last time with the fox boss.
What makes Souls-like enemies fun to me is that they are challenging. It's like you are outmaneuvering the enemy. Ultimately, I think it creates satisfying, rewarding combat. Death's Door got this right for me. It was hard enough to make you learn the mechanics, but it didn't make me sweat for hours and hours trying to defeat just one boss. So I concluded these few things. Number 1, the animations weren't the best. Animating is something I'm always trying to improve upon. Number 2, it looked like he was sliding on the ground. Number 3, there was little variation in the attacks. It felt like it was just slash and stab.
So back in Blender, after creating the base animations and a few attacks, I imported them into Unity and started coding a new enemy controller, this time using a more state-dependent AI. So instead of having one script that is like a giant mastermind of the enemy's brain, each state controls what the enemy can do next. So for example, once the enemy is in the blocking state and he blocks an attack, I coded it to have a high probability to transition to the bashing state. There was still one problem that I hadn't solved. You can see here as he circles the player, he still appears to be sliding across the ground. Right now I create animations set in place. Then I code the enemy to move as the animation is played. I did it this way because I thought it would be more flexible with coding the AI movement. But after reviewing other games, enemy actions are quite set and they rarely need dynamic values. This is when I changed to root motion. This means the animation now controls the movement speed. So I altered my old animations and added X and Z movement, and the biggest issue was making root motion work with the nav mesh agent. This is the before and after. My next task was the two-handed soldier. I started by creating a greatsword as his main weapon. I also equipped him with more armor since he doesn't have a shield to protect himself. Then I went into animating. My idea is to give him more variation in his attack. So I created attacks that close the distance and also a jump back animation to maintain range from the player. Creating these animations gave him a more agile style of gameplay. Out of all the enemies, I'd say he turned out the best. I think the animations look the most fluid and he's my favorite to fight. Pause! If you're interested in this game, please wishlist Burrows on Steam. It's the best way to support development, and you may as well hit that subscribe button also. Thanks guys, now back to the video. I then hopped back in Blender and created a bow for the archer. I then created his base animations, loading the arrow, drawing the bow, aiming the bow, firing the bow, and a melee if the player gets close. I started coding the movement state, which was quite different from the other enemies, since the archer's goal is to maintain range from the player, and the other two enemies' goal was to chase the player and close the distance. I then created a script to fire the arrow, which is definitely a bit janky. I have a base force that I multiply by the distance from the player. Then I add another multiplier for the height difference between the enemy and the player. Then I went back in Blender and I created 2 more animations of the archer looking up and down and put this in a blend tree. Then with some calculations, I was able to get the look at direction and convert that to a 0 and 1, which is looking up and down. Also, you can see that the arrow isn't facing the direction it is traveling. I thought this might be a bit tricky to fix, but this only required 1 line of code.
This is where Unity is just brilliant. Like the sponsor of this video.
I know, what a brilliant segue. Like the sponsor of this video. I didn't expect it that time. Isn't that just brilliant? And if you care about coding or logical thinking, this actually fits perfectly. Because Brilliant helps you think like a programmer. Brilliant isn't about telling you what to type or handing you answers. It trains the way you think. It helps you break down problems, spot patterns, and reason through logic. The same way I do when I'm debugging code at 2 AM wondering why nothing is working. You're actively testing ideas, making decisions, and seeing consequences immediately. Exactly the skills you need when writing clean logical code. And it's not just coding. Brilliant has courses across math, data, and science, from foundational concepts all the way to advanced topics. You don't need to be a genius, you just need the right challenges in front of you. Everything adapts to your level and pushes you forward without dumbing things down. You can try Brilliant free for 30 days at brilliant.org/LewisEvans or scan the QR code on screen. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited access to all their courses. After creating these soldiers, I decided to do some work on sound design, since there has basically been no sounds in the game up until this point, and I don't want there to be a huge backlog of audio later. I started with the player's basic actions, like the movements and attacks. Then I moved on to creating audio for the aerial movement, which was a little trickier to get right. It involved a lot of whooshes and cloth foley layered together to create these jumping sounds. Next on the list was to set up the enemy base. Well, I had already created the base in my last video, I just needed the enemies. Of course, in the beginning all the enemies decided to run in every direction, but after fixing that bug, it was fun to play against the enemies in, I guess, their natural habitat.
Last on the list was the fox, which I have been putting off since I dislike redoing work. It seems just very unproductive.
But nevertheless, I started by recreating his main weapon. He did have a giant sword that was a little demonic. I instead wanted to give him a battle axe. I'll explain why later. After creating the axe, I created a few different slash animations. I didn't like how the boss was so crouched in my last animations. I want him to tower over the player more. I then created a throwing, pulling, and dashing animation. I also modeled a rope that goes around his forearm. Once in Unity, I set up a new fox similar to before, but this time using root motion so he sticks to the ground. I attached a rope using the line renderer from his forearm to the end of the axe. Next, I coded a distance closer state so that he throws the axe towards the player and then pulls on the rope, using it like a grapple and launching himself in that direction. There is a few more things I wanted to add and polish, but here's what it's looking like so far. The question is, do you think these enemies look fun? Let me know in the comments below. That's it for this devlog, guys. Thanks for watching. Merry Christmas.